Hi there, my name's Chad Havel and I've decided to create a short series of videos to help introduce you to the MBA and help you build some of the skills that you might need to be successful in your studies in the MBA. On the other hand, the MBA is much more about learning just skills and learning knowledge. It's about being in different ways. So I'm going to be talking through some of these things in these videos as well. So I'll be covering things like critical thinking, argumentation, doing research and using the library and research tools, essay writing, things like that. These are often things we call generic skills in higher education, but actually they're not really all that generic. They're actually very specific to particular contexts. So even though you may have written essays before, or you may have done oral presentations before, or you may have done reading before, you almost certainly have done reading before, the type of reading or the types of ways that you'll be doing these activities in the specific context of the MBA might be a little bit different. And so I'll be talking you through some of those things. So for a lot of you, this will be back to study. So some of you may have done university study leading up to your career in business. You may have not studied since school, or you may have studied some TAFE, things like that. But for most people, this is a return to study. So people are often wondering, well, what's different about university? So what's different about university study compared to, say, school study or maybe study at TAFE? And in particular, what's different about studying at the University of Adelaide? Probably one of the most distinctive things is that university study is often research oriented. So the teaching and learning you'll undergo will be delivered by people who are at the cutting edge of their field in research. So your lecturers will be quite often not just teachers in their field, they'll be active participants in the business community, will be often leading their own businesses, maybe doing research and publishing scholarly journal articles, so that delivery is quite different. And also the type of work you do might be different in that you're expected to do research and expected to uncover new knowledge and formulate arguments based on evidence. So that's really the big thing that we've got here compared to maybe high school experiences and some experience of TAFE and the vet sector, where learning is much more focused around skills, applicable skills and vocational skills. So it's like learn how to do something in particular. University learning is a bit more broad in that way. It's different, and it's a different kind of leadership as well, which you'll learn about in your first course, Fundamentals of Leadership as well. One of the key things that really makes learning effective, something we know from lots of research and something that's also really important in the MBA, is the importance of reflective learning. So this is something that doesn't come naturally, and I'd really like to encourage you to practice doing this and start doing this at the very beginning of your MBA studies. So what do we mean by reflective learning? It means that in this instance, learning isn't necessarily just getting information and putting it inside your head. It's much more about reflecting on yourself, reflecting on the content, reflecting on how the content applies to the context that you're working within, or potential context that you may find in the future. So a key way of doing this is to begin reflecting on yourself as a learner. Like, what have been your learning experiences prior to this? What were your learning experiences at university or at high school or in primary school? What was your first day at school like, if you remember that? I certainly do. I think most people do. Who were some of the best teachers you've ever had, or some of the maybe not so great teachers that you've ever had? What was it about that teaching that really inspired you and made things work for you, or didn't make things work for you? So have a bit of a think about that, and this is an opportunity for us to confront some of our demons about some of our hang-ups and some of our baggage about learning in general and our specific experiences of learning. And then we can also think about what do you think you have to learn? So why are you doing the program? You probably have an idea as to why you're doing it, but then also think about, well, where are the gaps in your knowledge? So you may have been in a management role or a leadership role for quite some time, and you might find that you might feel fairly confident in some of the things about leadership. You've done some leadership courses in-house or outside, things like that, but you perhaps don't have any experience or background in maybe finance, accounting, or marketing. Or maybe you're a marketing manager and you're pretty strong in the marketing field, but you're not really sure about leading teams or working in an adaptive workplace or something like that. So have a bit of a think about what you feel your strengths are, and then where your gaps are and where you might need to fill them in. This will help you plan your learning and think about where you're going to put more time in, how you're going to strategize your study plan, what courses you'll do in what semesters, and things like that. And then also use all different types of, we call them reflective surfaces, in your learning as well. So bounce your ideas off lots of different people. Talk to your colleagues, talk to friends in the MBA. You'll make friends pretty quickly. Talk to your tutors, talk to your lecturers, talk to people in your workplace, talk to, leaders, people working underneath you, colleagues, people all over the place. Have a chat to them about your learning, about what you think you have to learn and what you're going to get out of this. So the idea of reflective learning is really like looking in a mirror and going, well, who am I as a learner, as a person? What do I know? What do I need to know? How does this information or these activities help me learn what I need to learn? How relevant is it? So it's really that opportunity of sitting back, reflecting a little bit, and then coming back to it, to the activity and to the learning. And through doing that, we often have amazing insights. So I know that for myself, when I've had a particular thorny research problem, or when I was in my undergraduate, I was writing an essay, the best thing I could do was forget about it for a bit and then go for a walk, or in the shower, or waiting in line at the supermarket. You'd have these insights, these explosions of insight. That's because you're giving yourself time to reflect on that. So reflective learning is one approach or philosophy of learning, and there are lots of different philosophies of learning. And it's not necessarily that one is better than others. There are some that are more well established in research, some that are seen as more effective for learning, some which are seen as a bit more old-fashioned or a bit less effective, but all different philosophies are appropriate to different people and different contexts and things like that. So broadly, what you have is a fairly old-fashioned approach to learning is what they call the transmission of knowledge model. So the idea there is that the lecturer is the amazing expert. They have all of this information and all this knowledge in their head, and they're going to deliver that to you. So as a student, you sit there because, you're just a student, so you don't really know anything, right? And you sit there with your head open, and the lecturer is going to pour in all this knowledge. And your job is to remember and retain all that knowledge, and then you'll get an exam or you'll get a test or some sort of assessment to see how well that knowledge has been retained. And then if you've retained a lot of that information, then you do well. If you haven't, then you haven't. Okay, that's what they call a transmission of knowledge model. A fairly old-fashioned approach, and one that you may remember from school, was certainly very dominant in, the 1950s style of school, where you've got, rows of desks and children sitting there eagerly just having to be given the information. That is one approach to learning, and it's relevant in some contexts, particularly when you've got some sort of technical knowledge, but it's not the only approach to learning. So thinking about how learning works and how learning works for you and how learning works most effectively is a really useful thing to do. This approach to learning has been in some ways quite overtaken by what they might call constructivist models. The idea that knowledge isn't something that you just transmit and put in your brain, it's something that you build within your brain, like a neural pathway. And that is actually done actively by the student. It's done through active learning. It's done through engagement with other students. And certainly the teacher has a very important role in facilitating that learning, but they're not the font of all wisdom. They're not the be-all and end-all of learning and the be-all and end-all of the process. So this puts a lot more responsibility on students, and puts responsibility on students to interact with each other and to engage in activities that are going to help build that knowledge rather than have that knowledge poured from a jug into your head. So that's a kind of a different approach to learning. And that's something that is more well established by research and seen as a more effective mode of learning. So quite often the best learning you can do is when you're doing something. So have a think about, what am I doing here? What can I be doing here? Even if you're in a lecture or you're in a kind of a presentation by the lecturer or your colleagues, think about what you're doing. Are you taking notes? Are you thinking about it? Are you making connections between this and the reading, or between this and your context? Are you preparing questions to ask? Are you asking questions or helping answer other students' questions? They're the kind of things that you want to think about, that active learning sort of thing. So you're going to be put on the spot to engage in lots of different ways, and that's just effective learning, basically. Another important approach to learning is the idea of lifelong learning. So learning, as you would know, being an MBA student, learning isn't something that you do when you're young and then you stop learning and you've learned everything you need to know and then you just continue on through life because you know everything you need to know. That's not really how learning works anymore. In the modern world, learning is what they call lifelong learning. We're always constantly learning, always engaged in learning. And you would probably know this from your own professional practice as well. You always have to stay up to date with computer programs, with approaches to management, with technical knowledge, with almost everything, different social media or email or technology, things like that. We're always learning. So think of this as a brave new step, but part of a process of lifelong learning. So in a way, we're going back to study, we're going back to learning, but in another way, we've always been learning. So parenting is a great example of how you're always learning, right? You're in this kind of lifelong learning sort of process. What you're doing now is you're engaging in a more formal style of learning in a particular program in a particular university that has its own culture and ways of doing things, but it's really a continuation of the learning that you've been doing over your whole professional life. So that's a kind of useful approach to take to it. Finally, another kind of thing we think about a lot, particularly in fundamentals of leadership, is transformational learning or transformative learning. So the idea here is that you're not necessarily the same person at the end of learning as at the beginning. It actually changes you as a person. And so learning is actually about change. So quite often we find that people who resist change are also have trouble with learning, okay, in some ways. So it's often difficult to adapt or change. This particularly occurs when you've got that kind of transmission model. People can think, oh, if I just put some information into my head, that's fine. I'll know some more stuff and I will have learned and that'll be fine. That's probably not the most valuable, effective or useful style of learning that you'll engage with in the MBA. Hopefully in the MBA, you'll engage in transformative learning. So you'll actually change as a person. When you come out of it, you'll be a different person. One of the things that we find in fundamentals of leadership in particular is that the people who find it the most valuable and the most rewarding and the most effective are those who come out and say, wow, I've really changed in some fundamental ways, in the way I see things or the way I act or how I use information or my approaches to things. It's really changed me, and that's amazing, and changed for the better as well. So transformative learning is a really important kind of philosophy of learning and approach to learning that we talk about there. Okay, that's it. I want to try and keep all these videos under 15 minutes so you don't get too bored. Hope that's been a useful introduction. Welcome to the MBA. It's really great to have you here, and hopefully I'll see you in class or around the offices at some time. Thanks.